Hi everyone, and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel with Right Side Blonde. Today I'm bringing you the August of 1999 issue of George magazine, the political humor issue, which is ironic because this is the first issue after John Kennedy's plane went down. So it's very interesting that right after the month that he dies, the next issue is a political humor issue with Ben Stiller on the cover. Also, something that stood out to me on this cover was that Ben Stiller is wearing a suit with a red tie, and he's talking on a red phone, and there's a red background. So there's a lot of red. As I mentioned before, red in gematria is 27, which comes to code, which comes to JFK. And we know someone else who likes to wear a red tie often. So there's just a lot of red and a lot of things that stood out to me on this cover. Above all, I know magazines have to plan for the future. And so this magazine was probably planned well before John Kennedy's July 16th, 1999 death. So this was already in the works before that time. But I still found it interesting that it was a humor issue the month after July of 1999. I'm not quite sure what to make of this, but wanted to share it with you regardless. The editor's letter from this magazine conveniently is not John Kennedy's letter. It's written by Ben Stiller. Ben Stiller in this issue was the guest editor. So what does this mean? Well, to me it's highly coincidental that the month after John Kennedy dies, which was July of 1999, that he has a guest editor. And of all of the other George magazines, I am not aware of any other guest editors. Maybe there's one that I've missed, but so far I've not seen any other guest editors. And the guest editor is none other than a comedian, someone to make us laugh, someone to tell us jokes. So I don't know what to make of it. You guys can put what you think, but I know I have some theories in my mind floating about, as I'm sure all of you do too. But I just wanted to point that out to you all. Ben Stiller's editor's letter, by the way, is absolutely hilarious. I'm going to read just a few parts of it. If you buy the magazine regularly, you might know that John F. Kennedy Jr. is usually the editor-in-chief, some Cinderella slippers to fill. As an actor, though, I had an in. I approached my guest editorship in the same way I would approach a role. I decided to use Jr. as a jumping-off point, playing the character of guest editor. In reality, we have a lot in common. John's dad was President of the United States of America. My dad was George's dad on Seinfeld. In the 8th grade, Yolanda Watts, who had a crush on me, used to affectionately refer to me as John F. Kennedy Jr. Actually, that's about all we have in common, so I set out to learn as much as I could about my new role model. I read as many tabloids as I could about him, even hung out with paparazzi outside his tanning salon. Sorry, I can't tell you where, ladies. What emerged was a complex and mysterious figure whose obsession with his magazine was matched only by his vast array of paragliding equipment. I think this issue reflects a slightly different take on politics per se, probably because of my general lack of knowledge of the subject. However, you will find a lot of stories dealing with something I am passionate about, laughing till your ass hurts. From There's Something About Mary filmmaker Peter Farrelly's crazy day with soon-to-be President Jimmy Carter to Janine Garofalo's witty insights into the evolution of blow-dried politicians to my day at the office, I think you'll agree that this rivals the Garth Brooks issue in terms of sheer LOL funniness. Wow, did he just coin the term LOL before it was actually interesting? I also believe that my in-depth conversation with Ricky Martin, moderated by Gonzo scribe Jerry Stahl, reveals a side of the pop sensation that no legit journalist has come close to capturing. As for me, well, let's just say I'm happy to be on the cover of any magazine that doesn't have me sitting on a kiddie train wearing an engineer's cap. The picture here is hilarious. It just shows Ben Stiller pushing John Kennedy's face out of the way and John laughing. Kind of cool. For today's article, I chose the article by Paul Begala called Take the Money and Run. Only a special politician can kick the campaign cash habit. Here's what GOP bandits George W. Bush and Steve Forbes don't want you to know about their addiction. Here we go. Back in 1991, I had an epiphany. It happened as I watched a Washington nerd lecturing Harris Wofford. Harris was then an appointed U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania, fighting hard to win an election in his own right and on his own terms. He was also a legend. He had worked with President Kennedy to establish the Peace Corps and had helped Martin Luther King Jr. apply the lessons of Gandhian nonviolence to the civil rights movement. And he had been president of 2 colleges, so why was that Washington operator griping at him? Billboards. An environmentalist, Wofford had cast an obscure vote in the Environment and Public Works Committee to limit the number of billboards on federal highways. The nerd, a fundraiser for Wofford's campaign, couldn't believe it. "You've got one of the nation's largest billboard companies in your state," he wheezed. "You just cost us $150 grand. Wofford, stunned by such a purely monetary appeal, just shrugged. Anyone who says our system of financing political campaigns isn't broken is wrong. I spent more than a dozen years running those campaigns, and just when we need radical reform the most, we're witnessing the most brash attempts ever to undermine the guidelines that we do have. Governor George W. Bush of Texas is beginning his quest for the presidency by hinting that he may be the first major non-self-finance presidential candidate to ignore the spending caps that are the basis of our federal campaign finance system. Sure, the limits are voluntary, but we have a word in Texas for Bush's attitude in blowing them off: chutzpah. The gist of campaign finance law is simple. The government gives matching funds to presidential candidates who agree to restrict how much they spend. I remember how amazing it seemed at the 1992 convention when the Clinton camp received one government check in the amount of $55 million. Perhaps Bush, who has already raised $15 million, figures, cynically, that he can simply ignore the public financing approach that every major candidate who wasn't paying his own way to the White House has followed. I can imagine him doing the math. Federal matching funds are worth about $16 million during the primaries, but I can raise a lot more than that from all the special interests just itching to suck up to me. Let's party. Steve Forbes is worse. Another guy who got rich the Republican way. Forbes acquired his vast wealth by having the courage, the brains, and the drive to select wealthy parents. Really wealthy parents. Obviously, this guy's a Democrat. This fool and his money has already said he'll raise and spend whatever he wants, thumbing his nose at the system most poor saps have to live with. George W. and Steve Forbes are too brazen to feel shame. If they were capable of that emotion, they wouldn't be able to look in the mirror in the morning and see a potential president of anything more than a yacht club. But you know who else ought to be ashamed? You and me. The reason the politicians haven't limited the role of money in elections is that we haven't forced them to. Like jocks on steroids, they're too pumped up to see that their behavior will destroy them in the long run. And we the people aren't doing our job. Politicians who oppose reform, like Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, are reliably reelected, while champions of reform, like Senator Russ Feingold, a Wisconsin Democrat, have near-death experiences at the ballot box. Only when politicians have the fear of God in them, or more likely, the fear of us, will they respond. As Bush and Forbes may show us this summer, there are great rewards in disregarding our public financing scheme and almost no reward in trying to toughen it. But a few courageous souls are trying anyway. Senators John McCain of Arizona and Russ Feingold have cobbled together a bill to clean up such dirty practices as the unlimited flow of soft money. But it's hardly radical reform, and it's unlikely to pass. We need to go much further. With the candor that led him to trade in his feather boa and purple tights for a power suit and the governor's mansion, Jesse Ventura, Minnesota's governor, recently said of campaign financing, "This is the one case where I will advocate socialism." Ventura would ban all contributions, including soft money, to politicians and parties, and instead would provide each party with a pot of taxpayers' money to spend as it sees fit. Senators Paul Wellstone of Minnesota and John Kerry of Massachusetts have written a bill that puts the idea of public financing into practice. It's real political reform that would give full public financing and free TV time to polls who played by the rules. The cost? Reformer Ellen Miller estimates the price tag on all congressional campaigns to be $1 billion. But the present system costs us much more in untold billions of sleazy loopholes and slimy subsidies that are bought and paid for by campaign dollars. Of course, all of this will remain the bloviations of columnists like yours truly until someone else gets angry enough to take on the issue. You. I know you're probably reading this on the beach or as you watch a baseball game on TV, but if you think money has too much influence on your elections, there's something I need you to do. Get up off your ass. Get on the phone and call members of Congress. Get online and email your senators. Get out some paper and write your local newspaper. Get out and go to the candidates' town hall meetings and ask them if they support putting the brakes on big money. And if they don't, ask them whom they're getting the big money from. The other option is truth in advertising. If we don't do something to limit big money, We ought to hang a neon sign across the Capitol dome that says, "For rent." This article brings up something so important, and that is, who owns these politicians? They have to get money from somewhere so they can run these campaigns. And then inevitably, these big corporations are going to want something from these politicians later on when they get elected. This system is not set up to serve the people. It's set up to serve these corporations. So there's definitely some reform that needs to happen with this, as Paul Begala says in his article. That does it for this episode of the George Collection. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
Magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.